us, they can get the recording. So it's such a small group. I don't know if we're going to even take an hour. So since it is such a small group, let me just start by saying, I think I know everyone here. Lisa Scales, the Executive Director for the Cultural Alliance of Western Connecticut, regional arts organization that is based in Danbury, Connecticut. We connect with artists, arts and cultural organizations in the greater Danbury area, as far north as New Milford and as far south as Richfield, Connecticut. And we have three basic tenets, and that is to elevate the arts, to advocate for the arts, and to collaborate. And we do that in a number of different ways, of which I think most on this call is aware of. But it does include building awareness about the awesomeness about arts and culture, connecting with business and community leaders for interesting high-profile projects that will either give jobs to artists and arts organizations, or in some way, again, to increase awareness about the arts. And then obviously advocacy is a big part of what we do. And one of the ways that we do that, an important way that we do that, is we're an affiliate of the Connecticut Arts Alliance. And I've been in this job 15 years. And I can tell you that in that time, one of the things that I've been had the privilege of doing is having served on that board of the Connecticut Arts Alliance many years ago. But I can tell you unequivocally that Brett Thompson, who's with us today to talk about what you all signed on for, has pretty much single-handedly retooled that organization and has really positioned it to be a force for Connecticut in advocacy for funding. So without any further delay, I want to just turn it over to my friend and colleague, Brett Thompson.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Thanks for those kind words. Made my head swell, but and it hasn't been that long since you haven't been on the board. I remember those days. So thanks all for joining us. As Lisa said, I'm Brett Thompson. I'm the executive director. I'm joined by my colleague, Alyssa, who's our community engagement guru. And we want to talk today about a very important project called the Arts, Culture, and Tourism Funding Roadmap. Just a little plug, as Lisa mentioned, we're Connecticut Arts Alliance. We're a statewide advocacy organization, a membership organization. We're affiliated with the Office of the Arts. We work closely with the regional service organizations, including Lisa's. And so we're delighted that you've invited us to come here today and talk about the roadmap. So Lisa, can I do a share screen?
You should be all set.
Okay. Let's see. It's always a mystery about how to do this, but let's see. We can make this happen. All right. Does that work? Everyone see that okay? Cool. Yeah. So Arts, Culture, and Tourism Funding Roadmap, a plan to invest in arts, culture, and tourism in the state of Connecticut. This is a partnership, a close partnership, and an important partnership between the Arts Alliance, the Connecticut Humanities, and Connecticut Tourism Coalition. The first time in my memory that the three sort of legs of the cultural stool in Connecticut have come together and worked really closely together, and the roadmap is the outcome of that. And so just a reminder, I think we might all know this, but sometimes we think we forget the power of who we are. So if you look at arts, humanities, and tourism attractions and the whole creative economy, we're over 1,000 organizations. We're over 13% of Connecticut's gross state product. That's about $40 billion a year. And indirectly and directly, we support employ 175,000 people. It's a pretty big deal. I mean, we should not forget that when we're talking, certainly when we're talking to legislators. So the roadmap vision, we envision a healthy, oops, I did this, sorry guys. Let me get rid of this. Healthy, vibrant, and diverse cultural sector strengthened by a robust tourism marketing that attracts visitors and businesses, spurs economic growth, and supports a strong and growing workforce. So this is kind of the overarching vision that we had for this project when we started it. Just to give you a background on where this thing came from, it all started back in December of 2021. The Arts, Culture, and Tourism Caucus called the three sectors together in Hartford. We went to the Science Center. They wanted to hear from us on what the legislature could do to be more supportive of arts, culture, and tourism in Connecticut. For those of us who are in the trenches, we probably didn't need to have a summit to tell them this, but we need money, right? We need funding. We need it to be more consistent. We need more money, and we need it to be distributed in a way that is fair and more equitable than perhaps it's been done in the past. So those were kind of the big learnings, the big ideas that came out of that summit. So John Michael Parker, who is a legislator and also a true advocate for arts and culture in the state, was kind of he was talking to me. He was talking to Jason Mancini at Connecticut Humanities. He was talking to Frank Burns at the Tourism Coalition, kind of separately about like, so what are we going to do next? What are we going to do with these recommendations coming out of this summit? And eventually we sort of decided and realized that we all needed to be together, and we needed to be working together on a project that would advise the legislature on what meaningful, reliable, and equitable funding would mean from the state. So we created a steering committee. You can see the members on the right-hand side. They were kind of our think tank that kind of gave us direction as we moved along. We hired Odyssey Consultants, which is run by Joshua Borenstein, a longtime arts person in the state of Connecticut, worked at Long Wharf for a number of years, really knows the community. His organization kind of led the project as project leaders. We held 6 virtual meetings. Maybe some of you were part of those. Over 200 people participated in those, sharing their personal and organizational ideas on what meaningful, reliable, and equitable funding would mean for them. It was certainly a validation of the key ideas that came out of the summit. People were asking for more money. They were asking for more reliability in state funding, and they were asking for it to be distributed in a way that was more fair and that reached more organizations that don't typically have access to state funding. And so out of that grew sort of this funding roadmap. And so there's a couple of reasons why this is an opportune time for us to be thinking and talking about this. So over the last couple of years, as I'm sure you know, the state invested quite a bit of funding into arts, culture, and tourism in the state, thanks to the American Rescue Plan. So federal money came into Connecticut. The legislature allocated a fairly historically significant amount of money to arts, culture, and tourism. So if we look at the Connecticut Cultural Fund, it was about $30.7 million over 2 years, 1,300 grants, more than the state has ever funded in state funding before. And if you look at some of the key statistics, 88% of them, almost 90%, use that funding to hire and keep employees. That's a workforce development issue. About half of them improved technology that was infrastructure building. And about a third of them supported K-12 education. So there's an education component as well. What the significance of this is for us all is that it gives us ammunition to convince and prove to the state, to prove to the legislature that investments in our community are important and that they provide a return on investment to the state. And this sort of the second piece of this was Office of Tourism received about $20.4 million over 2 years, probably more than they've received in a long, long time. And so they were able to do some really important things. They were focusing on 6 key demographics in order to attract different segments of the tourist population into Connecticut. They had an innovative social media campaign, but I think most importantly, they were able to do some market research and some information gathering that helps them better understand what's the most effective way to market Connecticut. And so kind of those two big things, along with some changes in leadership in the legislature. We have Senator Heather Summers and Representative John Michael Parker now co-chairing the Arts, Culture, and Tourism Caucus. So we've kind of got this momentum going that we don't want to lose going into this coming year. We want to make sure that the legislature understands that they will lose their investments in our community over the last couple of years unless they can sustain them going forward. So this is the ask. We're asking for $58.5 million, again, in more meaningful, reliable, and equitable funding. So meaningful, obviously, is the number itself. Reliable, we'll get to in a little while. We're proposing to the legislature that they diversify where the state funding comes from. So if any one of the pieces that funds the tourism fund goes down for some reason, like, for example, there's a pandemic, that there's a little more stability in the funding. And then equitable is a term we're using to describe not only inequities in the way the current legislature doles out money to through earmarks that leaves other organizations out, but also equitable in the sense of more organizations in the state that just have been historically left out or didn't have the resources to tap into state funding would have access. So those are kind of the three legs of the roadmap. This is how it plays out. We're asking for $25 million for statewide marketing and infrastructure that would go directly to the Office of Tourism. $17.5 million for the Connecticut Cultural Fund. That's more than in either of the last 2 years. I also would like to point out that if the roadmap is not successful, it really impacts the Connecticut Cultural Fund. It was only put into, funding was only provided for it for 2 years, and that funding expires this year. So we need to really make sure that the Cultural Fund is made permanent. About $8 million of the 58.5 goes into preserving the tourism fund line items that already exist. So certain organizations and groups of organizations have been targeted by the legislature for specific funding. We feel that funding, it's not politically viable for us to not support that funding. Legislators would not support the end of earmarks. And so just as a matter of practicality, we're asking for them to be preserved. And then $5 million to support Connecticut Humanities and the Connecticut Office of the Arts. This is for their other granting programs, their professional development opportunities, the other work that they do in the state. And then a last piece, $3 million for workforce development. We really would like to tap into some of the programs that the state already has in place, for example, for manufacturing pipelines, healthcare pipelines, to make sure that our colleges and universities are preparing students for careers in the arts and careers in humanities and hospitality. So those are kind of the 5 segments of the 58.5. This is the roadmap. This is what we're asking the legislature to do. Just to give you a sense of comparisons, if you look back pre-pandemic, pre-ARPA money, pre-federal money, our world looked pretty dire, right? There wasn't a lot of money coming out of the state of Connecticut to support arts, culture, and tourism. And if we look at 22 and 23, that's when ARPA funding kicked in. But we're asking for even higher level of support than that. We feel that the money that we're asking for is truly what is required from the state to support the 3 sectors adequately. Yeah, that's where we're asking this money for. So the reliable piece is something I mentioned before. So all of the money for arts, culture, and tourism from the state now flows through the tourism fund. The tourism fund is funded, by the hotel tax. So a percentage of the hotel tax goes into the tourism fund. It then goes out to the arts, culture, and tourism community. So what we're proposing is for the lodging tax, the percentage of the lodging tax that goes into the tourism fund to be increased from 10 to 25%. We're asking for a car rental tax, which the legislature enacted, a 3% car rental tax. They enacted to go into the tourism fund, but that got swept into the general fund the last several years. We want that money returned to the tourism fund. And then online gambling, right, is a new revenue source for the state. The co-chair of appropriations, Kathy Austin, has indicated publicly that she wants to use some of that money to support arts, culture, and tourism in the state. So this gives us some, it not only provides more funding to support the 58.5, but it's sort of a diversity of funding so that any one piece is not impacted. We don't lose everything. In the pandemic, when the hotel tax, when hotel and lodging went down, the tourism fund went down because the occupancy tax went down. So we want to have kind of a little bit of diversity here to smooth out any bumps in the road. Okay, so this is where we are right now with the roadmap. It is in the legislature, it's live and active. There was a bill submitted very early in the legislative session called HB 6321. That bill was proposed by Representative John Michael Parker. It's got about 20 or 25 co-signers on it. There was an Arts, Culture, and Tourism Caucus meeting early in the session, the first Friday of the session, as a matter of fact. We were able to present the roadmap to the full caucus. We've had conversations with leadership. We've talked to Kathy Austin and Tony Walker, co-chairs of appropriations. We've talked to Joan Hartley and Steve Meskers, co-chairs of commerce. We've talked to some other folks in the legislature. We've talked to some folks in the governor's office, just really trying to get leadership behind what we're doing. We've gotten really positive feedback. I think the only question that folks have, which is, I guess, not unexpected for legislators, is kind of a worry about where the money is going to come from, right? Will there be, can they find enough sources of money to support $58.5 million? Right now, the Commerce Committee has raised a concept bill based on the roadmap that kind of supersedes this HB 6321. That bill, by raising it, it just kind of indicates that there's interest in the Commerce Committee to support this. Once the bill has a bill number, which it doesn't yet, we'll be asking folks to urge legislators to co-sign. That's the best way to show broad support for a bill, is to get co-signers. Once that bill number is assigned, we'll be reaching out to the community. There'll be a public hearing on that bill. We'll certainly be reaching out to folks for testimony on that. Once that happens, we are hoping, and we're hoping that the bill gets voted out of Commerce, probably goes to a subcommittee of appropriations called Development and Conservation and Development, where it needs to be voted out of the subcommittee to the full appropriations committee. It will probably then receive another public hearing and hopefully voted out to the full floor for a vote. So that's kind of the process that this takes. It can take turns at any point in the process. We're never quite sure where things are going to end up. So a lot of times we are pivoting at a moment's notice to kind of, oh, there's a public hearing tomorrow, or the bill just got sent to appropriations. We need to reach out to appropriations. So for the community, it means we just need to be vigilant and ready to act when the moment is right. And so some things that you can do to stay engaged in this process. Alyssa is going to be putting some links about the things I'm talking about in the chat for you. But the first is to sign up for our sort of our support network. It will get you on our email list so that you'll hear about action items, action alerts that you can act on, updates for the roadmap. We don't share your information. We're not going to spam you. This is only for the roadmap. and then learn about it. We have created a website called nextactct.org, where it'll be sort of the place where information about the roadmap gets consolidated. On that website, there are a couple resources. There's a PowerPoint that we shared with the legislature that has, it's a larger PowerPoint than the one I'm showing you here, but it's basically includes all of the information that we shared with the legislature. There's a 2-page document there that lays out the ask, the rationale for the roadmap, and then a 1-pager that's kind of the talking points. It's kind of the bare bones of what the roadmap project is about. And then lastly, as I mentioned before, participate. When we reach out and ask for testimony, when we reach out and ask for folks to call legislators, it only takes a couple minutes, and it's hugely important because legislators care about what their voters think. They care about what you want them to do. They pay attention when, it doesn't take hundreds of people necessarily, a dozen people or 5 or 6 people contacting a legislator makes them notice that this is something they need to pay attention to. So that's kind of my presentation. I know it's a lot, it's kind of stuffed in. I'd love to answer any questions or have conversation with you about any aspect of this. Lisa, that is me.
Okay, yeah, you guys feel free to take yourselves off mute. It's a small group. Now would be a good time for questions. Any comments, thoughts? We're going to be, while you're thinking of them, as a partner with CAA, so you're going to be hearing a lot of reminders coming from our office as well on this, via email, social media. And I know that a comment that I have heard from our legislative leaders in this area is they wish that they could see, leaders in the arts community in Hartford more. And so Brett mentioned that when the time comes for public hearings, it's always nice to have to show up there in person to give a testimony. But if you're unable to do that, I have in the past submitted written testimony. And so that's something that I'll probably be encouraging with people like yourself to do as well. So it's not always easy to get on the other side of the state, as I often tell my colleagues who are on that side of the state that I invite here. So, and so because of that and other, issues that come up, that just doesn't make it easy to get to Hartford, especially on a moment's notice. Written testimony is also fine, but our legislators do need to hear from us. So I just wanted to emphasize that point.
Yeah, and so just to follow up on that quickly, I think there will be a Zoom. It'll be hybrid public hearings, so Zoom will be an option. Although the Capitol is open, so people can actually go these days.
Drea?
Yeah, so I'm joining here mostly on the tourism side in my job with as an executive director of the Norwalk River Valley Trail. And during last year's legislative session, there was a possibility of increasing the funding for recreational trail grants. And there was an effort to reach out to people, within that sort of industry to send letters, to reach out to legislators and send letters of support. And it really made a difference. So I know sometimes we don't think we can do much when it comes to this stuff, but really just, I would encourage, reaching out to all your legislators and submitting written testimony, because it is very effective. And, it'd just be worthwhile also for the Cultural Alliance to be able to respond in that way and support additional funding.
Yep. Yeah, it'd just be great in general to see more letters coming from our part of the state. And for those of you that are associated with other organizations, ask your board members to do the same.
And staff, for that matter.
And staff, yep.
And even even inviting your legislators to come and, if you work in an organization, having them come is important so they can actually see the work that you're doing. And just sometimes just reaching out and saying, hey, I'm in your district and I'm here and I support the arts. I hope you do too. It's really important that we stay connected to them. And I know, as Andrea said, sometimes it feels like no one's paying attention, but they are paying attention. So.
Okay, any questions for Brett? Anything on the roadmap that you want to respond to, or? Oh, and I know that some of these people on this call, you guys must not have had enough Java, because there's some talkers on this call. Okay, well, Brett, I guess you've done a really excellent job, and the presentation is pretty clear and direct. Unless folks, oh, Michelle, I see your hand, your thumb is up. Oh, that's just a thumbs up. Gotcha. Okay.
So
yes.
Lisa, Alyssa will send you an email with the links to some of this stuff if you want to share it with your community. That would be great.
Yep, I'm already on it. We're sending out a post today on the Learn piece. And so we'll probably include this in our just ongoing social. So yeah, send all the links that you have, Alyssa, that would be fine. I see somebody's entered the chat. Thank you, I signed up. Oh, yay, that's great. Cool. Okay, yeah.
Thanks all.
Great, thank you. Thank you for coming, Brett and Alyssa. Thank you for the presentation.
Take care.